Hey there, I'm Osman Faruqi, host of The Drop, a weekly culture show from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Every episode, I'll be breaking down the latest in the world of TV, film, music and pop culture, with the help of some of the best writers and critics in the country. Sometimes we go deep.
There's a thrill in seeing what's meant to be private out publicly.
But mostly, we have fun.
I love her asking Logan for a selfie and saying, congrats on the deal, ka-ching!
And there's never been a better time to start listening to The Drop. Right now, we're breaking down every episode of the final season of Succession. Follow The Drop with me, Osman Faruqi, in your favourite podcast app.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, May 18th.
Breaking news, Joe Biden has cancelled his historic visit to Australia next week as debt ceiling negotiations continue in Washington. Prime Minister
It was meant to be a moment of great triumph for Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. American President Joe Biden would finally be visiting our shores for a historic meeting. Biden was meant to arrive on Tuesday in what would have been the first visit of an American president to Australia in 10 years.
President Biden rang Prime Minister Albanese this morning and let him know the news that he wasn't going to be able to make it to Australia, which is, of course, disappointing, but we understand that he's...
But then yesterday, less than 9 hours after Albanese confirmed this historic milestone, the American president cancelled.
This is a decision that's been made overnight, our time, in the United States. The Quad Leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week.
Today, Foreign Affairs and National Security correspondent Matthew Knott on why Biden pulled out and what this might mean for the relationship between the two countries. So, Matt, American President Joe Biden announced yesterday that he's cancelled his planned trip to Australia. He was meant to address Parliament on Tuesday and attend a meeting of representatives from Japan, Australia and India on Wednesday. So what is the significance of this meeting that he was going to be attending, called a Quad? And what's the significance of Biden not attending it?
Yeah, the Quad in recent years has become, almost out of nowhere really, an extremely important international gathering. You've got leaders of four very important democracies meeting together at a leaders level once a year since 2021 to talk about what they can do together to get things done. Now, the word they rarely mention is China, but the significance of the Quad is that these are four democracies presenting a joint democratic alternative to China's authoritarian style of leadership. And this was the first time that the meeting was going to be hosted in Australia. So it was a very big deal for Australia and particularly for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And while he was visiting for that meeting, Joe Biden was going to travel to Canberra and address a joint sitting of Parliament. That again would have been a big deal because a US president hasn't visited here since Barack Obama in 2014. And we wake up today to learn that it's not going to happen.
So when did Albanese become aware of this? Because it seems to be a real mess.
Yes, the handling of this from the American side, I think, is not what Albanese and his team would have wanted. We first got inkling of this last week when Joe Biden said that because of the debt ceiling negotiations happening in Washington, it is possible he may not be able to travel. He may have to stay put to meet with congressional leaders there. But the official line from officials in Canberra and in Washington was that planning for this trip is going full steam ahead. We're ploughing on. At 10:30 on a Tuesday night, Albanese officially announced that Biden was coming to address Parliament. And then just 9 hours later, the meeting was officially off. And he's made clear that, this is a disappointment to him. He and Biden have hit it off well so far, their relationship. But he's saying, he understands that the president needs to remain in the States.
But the fact that this happened such last minute, does this indicate that the leaders, that Joe Biden and Anthony Albanese, are just not on the same page on some level?
I think it shows more so that America's in a really serious debt crisis right now. I don't think there's any doubt that Albanese and Biden get along, but the communication here has been poor.
Okay, so Matt, you just mentioned the debt crisis. That's the thing that we understand has led to Biden cancelling. So just briefly, can you help us understand what's going on there?
Yes, so this is a legislated debt ceiling that America has, which is essentially the amount of debt it's allowed to go into to allow to keep spending its bills. And it's about to hit, it's unclear exactly when, but in a couple of weeks, it's looking like it's going to hit the limit in which essentially it runs out of money and won't be able to pay welfare benefits, for example, and that would be economically catastrophic for the country, and it would have knock-on effects for the entire world. So Biden, who prides himself on his negotiating skills, has been talking to top Republicans. They're seeing this as an opportunity to cut government spending in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. So they're in negotiations that haven't been progressing very far. They're probably going to come down to the wire. So the Quad Summit was scheduled for May 24. It's looking like June 1 could be the key date when everything could explode in terms of the US debt. And that's why Biden felt he couldn't cut it so fine to be out of the country at that time.
Right. And you've also written that Biden's cancellation will make Xi Jinping, China's president for life, giddy with delight. So why is that?
Yeah, so since the Quad was first formed in 2007, Beijing has absolutely hated it. They really dislike the Quad. Not so much because of what it actually does. You know, in my experience covering the Quad, the initiatives it announces, are pretty piecemeal, to be honest. There's been some things around vaccine sharing and illegal fishing. But China's problem with it, first off, is what it symbolizes, what it represents, is these four democracies joining together, presenting an alternative to China. That's very powerful, particularly the images of these four leaders of very different countries standing together. Secondly is the potential of the Quad and what it could become. With a joint population of around 2 billion people, if these four leaders get together, they can make things happen very quickly. There's also been talk about whether the Quad could one day include South Korea and Canada. Xi Jinping really doesn't want this to become an entrenched feature of international diplomacy. So anything that's going wrong with the Quad is good news for him, because by contrast to somewhere like America, China, which is an authoritarian state, is looking very stable.
Okay, so Joe Biden pulling out of his trip here has led to the cancellation of the entire Quad meeting. We get that, but this does come at a delicate time for Australia and the US. We just ditched the French. We agreed to buy nuclear-powered submarines from the Americans. And so what? Now they're just not that interested in us?
Well, yeah, I think there's going to have to be some smoothing over here on Washington's behalf, because I think they know that for a country like Australia that's middle power, a smaller nation on the international stage, this is a little embarrassing. So I think from here they're going to try to make amends. The official line is that everything is going on as normal. This is just a bit of a blip, really. Albanese has been invited to go to Washington later in the year, so I'm sure that Biden will lay things on pretty thickly there when he visits. But it's going to be interesting whether Biden ever comes to Australia, because next year America's going into an election year. He'll have to be campaigning. It will have been a decade since a US president has come to Australia. So it is interesting that as our nations have become closer and closer through initiatives like AUKUS, they don't find time to actually get on a plane and come here.
And I wonder if it hits Australia or Australian prime ministers in like a soft spot, because Australia, I feel like, has that perception of itself, some sense of insecurity, I guess, on a world stage, not mattering. And do you think this sort of hits us where it hurts?
Yes, we have a bit of a cultural cringe here. We have this idea that we're a middle power, and a lot of experts I've been speaking to have been saying, Australia has to realize that we're actually an important country. We're in a very important part of the world. We matter. Look at things that we're doing with AUKUS. We're going to be one of only 7 countries with nuclear-powered submarines. We're in something like the Quad that other countries we'd compare ourselves to, like Canada or South Korea, they're not involved. We really do matter, and what we say and do matters in our region. But then now this big moment for Albanese that would have come, right on the first anniversary of his government isn't going to happen. So, yeah, it's a bit of a setback there.
Which is interesting because I'm wondering, you mentioned that there's this closer and closer tie, but does this maybe signal a weakening of commitment from the United States to help protect Australia from China? Like, what might the Albanese government read into this, do you think?
Look, I think Albanese himself is a politician. He himself understands the importance of domestic politics. We always see the question coming up in Australia, is the Prime Minister spending too much time overseas? Like, is he this jet-set Prime Minister? And that same conversation was happening in America. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket here. Why are you going to Australia and Papua New Guinea at such a crucial time? So Albanese understands that. But the issue I think smart analysts have pointed to this morning is that the question is not so much Biden's commitment. I think he really is devoted to foreign affairs. He's devoted to providing a democratic alternative to China. He speaks very passionately about the battle between democracy and autocracy. The question isn't where his heart is, but can America actually deliver with the system that it has? It's now becoming just a normalized feature of American politics that every few years the government either shuts down or is on the verge of shutting down, that the nation might be about to hit its debt ceiling, meaning the government can't even pay its own bills. This has become a normal feature of American politics, and this is supposedly the leader of the free world and the country that Australia is relying primarily on for its security. This is our alliance partner. So that's the troubling thing in the short term. It's not Biden's commitment, but can he deliver? And then secondly, Biden won't be president forever. In just 2 years, President Donald Trump could be back in office, who would be a much more volatile and unpredictable figure.
I mean, that's just a lovely note to end on. Thanks so much, Matthew.
Hope that makes you feel better.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills-Turbot, with technical assistance from David McMillan. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.